They were literally slaughtered. And I think, who could do that to little children?
It was so intentional. They slaughtered them.
They say no crime is more unforgivable than taking a child's life. And in this case, that horror became the driving force behind a decades-long investigation in Phoenix, Arizona. On Labor Day, 1982, a father lost his daughter to an epileptic seizure, a tragedy no parent should ever face. But when he returned home, hoping to grieve in peace, he walked into something far worse. His wife and her 2 children had been brutally murdered. One loss was already unbearable, but this was a nightmare beyond imagination. Detectives scrambled for answers, chasing leads that led nowhere, desperately searching for a motive. But as the years passed, the case went cold. Now, more than 42 years later, 2 chilling questions remain. Who slaughtered Valerie and her little girls? And why? When people hear about an unsolved murder from more than 40 years ago, it's easy to assume the case is lost to time. But time doesn't erase the pain, and it certainly doesn't erase the truth. With today's advancements in forensic technology and the power of public attention, we've seen cold cases cracked wide open, revealing shocking answers after decades of silence. The brutal stabbing of a young mother and her 2 little girls is one of those cases, a tragedy that still lingers in the shadows, waiting for justice. Someone out there knows what happened that night, and after all these years, the Pride family still deserves answers. But before Valerie's name was tied to one of Phoenix's most haunting murder cases, she was a young woman with big dreams and an unstoppable drive. Born on March 9, 1958, she grew up in Arizona with 5 brothers and 1 sister, shaping her into a strong and determined person. She attended South Mountain High School, where she was known for her intelligence and ambition. After graduating, she set her sights on Arizona State University, determined to build a better future for herself. But Valerie wasn't just a student, she was also in love. In high school, she started dating a young man named Jimmy Pride. Their relationship blossomed, and in 1974, they got married. Just 1 year later, they welcomed their first daughter, Shantia. Then in 1977, their family grew again when Valerie gave birth to their second daughter, Dwana. Even as a young mother, Valerie refused to let go of her ambitions. She had dreams of becoming an electrician, an industry dominated by men at the time, and she wasn't about to let anything stand in her way. Around the time Dwana was born, she landed an apprenticeship co-sponsored by the Electrical Workers Union, a rare and competitive opportunity. But Valerie didn't just enter the field, she made history. She became the first black female electrician to work at the Palo Verde nuclear plant, breaking barriers while raising 2 small children. As you can see, her life was a balancing act, juggling motherhood, work, and the pressures of being a pioneer in her field. But despite her accomplishments, Valerie's personal life wasn't without struggles. She and Jimmy's marriage eventually came to an end, leading to a divorce. Still, she remained focused on her career and her children, determined to provide them with the best life possible. After her divorce, Valerie found love again with a man named Ben Daniels, a co-worker at the nuclear plant. He also had children from a previous relationship, and as their bond deepened, they began planning a future together. But beneath the surface, their relationship wasn't as perfect as it seemed. Valerie's sister Vicky later shared in an interview with ABC5 in Phoenix that there were things in Ben's past that cast a shadow over his relationship with Valerie. She didn't go into detail, but she did say that Ben would often reassure Valerie that he had everything under control. Whatever those issues were, they didn't seem to stop Valerie from moving forward with their relationship. She trusted him, she believed in their future, and soon they were taking a major step together. In 1982, Valerie and Ben decided to buy a house, an exciting milestone for any couple. They settled on a newly built Spanish-style home in the South Mountain area of Phoenix, a place where they hoped to build a fresh start. At the same time, Valerie was entering the final year of her electrician apprenticeship. She was on the verge of a breakthrough. Her career was taking off. She had found love again after her divorce, and now she had a new home where she and her daughters could create new memories. Everything seemed to be falling into place. But sometimes, the most promising moments in life can be shattered in an instant. Just weeks after moving into their new home, tragedy struck in the most unexpected way. Labor Day weekend of 1982 started like any other holiday for Valerie and her daughters. It was meant to be a day of rest, family time, and simple joys. But by Monday, September 6th, what began as a normal day took a devastating turn. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, Ben received a phone call that no parent ever wants to get. His 9-year-old daughter from a previous relationship had suffered an epileptic seizure while taking a bath. According to reports, the child's mother had been supervising her but briefly stepped away. In those few moments, the little girl had a seizure and slipped beneath the water. She was rushed to the hospital where doctors fought to save her. But by the time Ben arrived, it was too late. His daughter had been pronounced dead. While Ben was at the hospital, grappling with this unimaginable loss, Valerie and her daughters remained at home, completely unaware of what had just happened. In an era before cell phones, there was no quick way for Valerie to reach Ben, no way to check in or ask what was happening. She could only wait for him to call. Now, what exactly transpired in the Pride home during those next few hours remains a mystery. But what we do know is that at around 9:30 that evening, Valerie spoke on the phone with Ben's brother. That call would be the last known contact she ever had with anyone outside of her home. Over the years, reports have varied about who exactly Valerie was speaking to on the phone that night. Some sources claimed it was a friend, while others believed she was talking to her brother. However, in a more recent interview, Valerie's sister, Vicky, clarified that she was actually on the phone with Ben's brother. According to him, their conversation lasted about 10 minutes. It's likely that he was updating Valerie on what was happening at the hospital with Ben's daughter, but then something interrupted their call. Someone knocked on Valerie's front door. She told Ben's brother that she had to hang up to answer it, since Ben wasn't home, and that was the last time anyone heard from her. Neither Valerie nor Ben's brother could have known that this would be the final conversation she would ever have. At around 10 p.m., after spending hours at the hospital, Ben finally returned home, emotionally drained, devastated by the loss of his daughter, and likely just wanting to rest. But as he approached his house, something felt off. The front door was slightly open. That wasn't normal, especially not in the Arizona summer heat, when people kept their doors shut to keep the cool air inside. Cautiously, Ben pushed the door open and stepped inside, and what he found was beyond his worst nightmares. Blood, everywhere.
On a quiet street in South Phoenix, Valerie Pride and her 2 daughters, Shonita and Duana, were murdered.
And they were brutally, repeatedly stabbed inside their living room in very close proximity.
His 2 stepdaughters, 8-year-old Shantia and 4-year-old Duana, lay lifeless in the living room, their small bodies covered in blood. They had been brutally murdered. Just a few feet away, near the kitchen, Valerie was also dead, her body drenched in blood. The home they had just moved into, the place where they had hoped to build a new life, had become the scene of an unspeakable massacre. Ben's screams pierced the night. Overcome with horror, he collapsed, wailing so loudly that neighbors rushed outside, trying to understand what was happening. It was they who called the police, as Ben was too inconsolable to do anything but grieve. For any parent, losing a child is a pain that words cannot describe. But to lose a child and then return home to find your entire family slaughtered, it was unfathomable. When the police arrived, even seasoned officers struggled to process what they were seeing. Many described it as the most horrifying crime scene they had ever encountered. Blood covered the floors, the walls. It was everywhere. One detective, speaking to the Arizona Republic, described it simply: "My God, it's terrible in there. There are stabbings everywhere." Stabbings are already some of the most violent types of murders, but when children are involved, the horror is magnified. The two little girls were found huddled together in the living room near a love seat. They were still in their pajamas, meaning they had likely been preparing for bed when the attack happened. Valerie, on the other hand, was found in the dining area, close to the kitchen. Her body was just feet away from the back door, as if she had been trying to escape. All three victims had been stabbed multiple times. Reports later revealed that one of the girls had been brutally mutilated. Strangely, there were no signs of forced entry. This meant that the killer had either been invited in or had somehow entered without breaking in. It wasn't until police learned about the knock on the door during Valerie's last phone call that they began piecing together a chilling possibility. Whoever had knocked that night may have been the person responsible for this unimaginable crime. And just as disturbingly, the murderer hadn't lingered in the house. Investigators determined that after the killings, the suspect had escaped through the back door and jumped over the fence, disappearing into the night. Now, the killings were initially thought to be a robbery gone wrong, but that theory was quickly shattered. There was no sign of forced entry, no stolen belongings, nothing to suggest a break-in. Instead, what lay before them was a scene of unimaginable carnage. Someone had entered that house with one purpose, and that is to kill. But who would want to murder a young mother and her little girls in such a savage manner? That was the question burning in the minds of investigators, and they knew time was not on their side. A killer was out there, and they had to find them before they struck again. That night, the neighborhood was silent, but someone had heard something. As police canvassed the area, one neighbor admitted to catching the sound of a heated argument coming from the Pride home around 9:45. But they had dismissed it as just another family dispute. When they peeked outside, they saw nothing, no stranger lurking, no commotion, nothing that screamed danger. And then, an hour later, at around 11, Valerie's ex-husband, Jimmy Pride, arrived at the house. When officers broke the news that his daughters had been murdered, he collapsed on the pavement, his anguish screams ripping through the night just like Ben's. He was inconsolable, thrashing, sobbing uncontrollably. The pain was unbearable, and officers had to physically restrain him as he broke down. Now, as mentioned earlier, behind the house on the wooden fence was a bloody handprint. It was undeniable proof that the murderer had escaped by scaling the fence, vanishing into the darkness, slipping through the yard of an abandoned home nearby. But whose handprint was it? And what kind of monster was capable of such a savage act? The investigation took an even darker turn when detectives realized the Pride family had only recently moved into the neighborhood. They had been there for just a few weeks, barely long enough to make friends, let alone enemies. No one truly knew them, and yet someone had wanted them dead. Desperate for answers, detectives shifted their focus to Valerie's life, digging into her social circles, family ties, and any hint of an enemy in the shadows. But the deeper they searched, the more unsettling the truth became, because there was nothing. Valerie had no history of conflicts, no bitter feuds, no past that suggested a violent end. She was a devoted mother, living an ordinary life. And yet, someone had shattered that life in the most gruesome way possible. Then came the autopsy results, confirming that all three victims had been stabbed multiple times. The attack was frenzied, brutal, but there was one detail that stood out. None of them had been sexually assaulted. That ruled out one possible motive, but it didn't bring them any closer to the truth. With every passing day, the case grew colder, the unanswered questions piling up, and naturally, the town was gripped by fear. On September 10, 1982, Valerie and her daughters were laid to rest, but their funerals were anything but peaceful. A dark cloud hung over the community, a terrifying realization that a killer was still out there, walking free. Then, detectives uncovered a bizarre lead. A month before the murders, Valerie and her husband Ben's home had been broken into. At first, it seemed like a standard burglary, but the details were anything but normal. The intruder hadn't just ransacked the house, they had slashed the waterbed in the couple's room. Even more disturbingly, they had taken Valerie's clothes and dumped them into the water. It was personal. This wasn't a thief looking for valuables. This was someone with a grudge, someone who wanted to send a message. Could this have been a warning? Had Valerie unknowingly crossed paths with someone dangerous? Investigators desperately tried to connect the dots, but once again, the case hit a dead end. Whoever had done it had vanished without a trace. As months passed, promising leads turned to dust. Hundreds of tips poured in, each offering the hope of a breakthrough, but none led detectives any closer to the truth. The case, once burning with urgency, began to grow cold, and as it did, the rumors started. Whispers spread through the town, theories emerging like shadows in the night. But one stood out among the rest, a chilling suggestion that the murders might be connected to the tragic death of Ben's daughter. Some believed Valerie and her daughters had been killed as part of a twisted act of revenge. Ben's 9-year-old daughter had died under tragic circumstances, and some speculated that someone blamed Valerie. But when investigators revisited the case, the truth was clear. The child had suffered an epileptic seizure and drowned. The autopsy confirmed it. There was no evidence of foul play, no reason to believe her death had been anything more than a devastating accident. But still, the rumors persisted, feeding the town's paranoia. As the 1-year anniversary of the murders approached, detectives found themselves no closer to solving the case than when they had first begun. The brutal slaying of Valerie and her daughters had shaken the whole town to its core, yet despite relentless efforts, investigators were still chasing shadows. A reward of $2,000 was being offered by the union Valerie worked for, along with the Silent Witness program, but not a single lead had brought them closer to the truth. Then, in August of 1983, the case took a shocking turn. Police announced an arrest. This news sent a ripple through the town, raising hopes that justice was finally within reach. But what stunned everyone even more was the suspect, a 14-year-old high school student. Detectives also revealed that they were also searching for 2 additional suspects, another juvenile and an adult, whom they believed had played a role in the murders. The Arizona Republic newspaper reported that police suspected the killings were an act of revenge for the death of Ben's daughter, a theory that had once been whispered about but never confirmed. The arrested teenager was allegedly a relative of the little girl who had died. Could someone have blamed Valerie for the child's death? Had resentment festered into something dark and violent? The very thought was horrifying, but the theory itself raised more questions than answers. If Ben's daughter's death had been ruled an accident, why would someone hold Valerie responsible? And if revenge was truly the motive, why murder her daughters as well? It didn't make sense. Even the investigators had their doubts. But just as quickly as it seemed they had found a motive, the case fell apart. Within 24 hours of the arrest, the 14-year-old was released. The district attorney refused to press charges, stating that more investigation was needed. Whatever evidence detectives had, it wasn't strong enough to hold up in court. The other 2 potential suspects? Never arrested. No charges, no answers. And just like that, the case that had briefly flickered back to life went cold once again. 2 years after this, a neighbor made a startling discovery: a knife buried in a backyard. It was eerily similar in size and shape to the one believed to have been used in the murders. Investigators wasted no time sending it to the crime lab, hoping this could finally be the break they needed. Maybe, after all this time, they had found the murder weapon. But once again, hope turned to heartbreak. The knife was tested for DNA, but there was nothing, no trace of Valerie, Shantia, or Dwana. Another dead end, another roadblock in a case that seemed destined to remain a mystery. As the years stretched into decades, detectives refused to let the case go cold. They combed through every shred of evidence, spoke to more than 1,000 people, and chased down every lead, yet they still couldn't pinpoint the killer or their motive. By 2012, investigators admitted they had exhausted every avenue. They needed the public's help. Someone out there had to know something. They remained convinced that this was a deeply personal crime, that whoever had done this had entered the Pride family's home just to murder them. And now, more than 4 decades have passed since that horrific night. The mystery remains unsolved. The brutal murder of Valerie, Shantia, and Dwana still lingers like a ghost over the community, an open wound that refuses to heal. Investigators believe that someone close to Valerie holds the key to unlocking the truth. But how could a person capable of such savagery go on living as if nothing had happened? Did they feel guilt? Did they ever fear getting caught? Or had they convinced themselves they had gotten away with murder? In recent years, with advancements in forensic technology, detectives have begun re-examining evidence. DNA found at the crime scene has been submitted into the national database, raising the possibility that a breakthrough may still come. But even if the killer is eventually unmasked, no explanation will ever make sense. There is no justification for the slaughter of an innocent mother and her 2 young daughters. This crime was the very definition of senseless. Valerie, Shantia, and Dwana did not deserve what happened to them. And no matter how much time has passed, one thing remains certain. Anyone who could commit such an unspeakable act deserves to be brought to justice. Now, I want to hear your 2 cents on this. Do you truly believe this could have been an act of revenge? If it really was a relative of Ben's child, why would they go out of their way to commit murder instead of mourning on the very same day the daughter passed away? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.